No. Because the unified opinion must be based upon the Quran and the Sunnah. And that's a proof for the ijma' from the Quran. Another proof, which is from the Sunnah, which is a lot more clearer, is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ where he said that my ummah, my nation, will not gather upon error. My ummah will not gather upon error. Meaning that it is impossible for this ummah, because we are the last nation on earth to receive a revelation. There's no prophet after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, nor will there be a book revealed after the Quran. Therefore, it is impossible for the whole ummah in its entirety to lose its religion, just like the Christians did. The Christians, they lost their message. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to abrogate whatever they had, and also to rectify the corruption that occurred in their religion. And just like when the Jews before the Christians lost the teachings of Musa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to them prophets, finally culminating the prophets of the children of Israel through Isa ibn Maryam, the Messiah, al-Masih, where which he clarified the corruption and rectified the errors which the Jews had set in the scriptures, which they had received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because we are the last ummah, as the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, and because of all the evidences in the Quran and the Sunnah which show that there is no prophet nor book to be revealed after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ or the Quran, therefore it is impossible for this whole ummah in its entirety to gather upon error, in the sense that nobody knows what the truth is anymore. But rather, as the Prophet ﷺ said, there must always remain one group upon the truth. And they are victorious upon the truth. And in a narration he said, they are unharmed by those who quit them, meaning those who care not to be with them, and those who oppose them, those who try to go against them, until the day of resurrection. And in another narration, till the descent of the Messiah, Isa ibn Maryam. So the point is that the consensus of the earliest generations of Muslims is a strong evidence, or source, we might say, foundation which the Sunni Muslims use to derive their beliefs. Now there are two other issues, two other sources which are used sometimes to derive their beliefs, and other groups have misunderstood the manner of deriving beliefs by misunderstanding the role or the correct position of these two other matters. And that is al-fitra, or the natural disposition which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed in every single human being. And the second one is al-aql, or reasoning. Some people amongst Muslims and non-Muslims have placed too much weight on these two matters. Al-fitra, man's natural disposition, and also man's ability to reason. And therefore they have deviated from the way of the prophets, from the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in understanding the correct beliefs. And that is because if you look in detail concerning the methodologies used by mankind as a whole, concerning obtaining beliefs, you find that they do not step out of three methodologies. The first methodology, the methodology of the prophets, is that it's based upon revelation. Based upon revelation. A second methodology is the methodology used by the philosophers and those who have been affected by the philosophers, who base their understanding of beliefs upon philosophical speculation, upon reasoning and argumentation. And they've gone astray. Because they've used the mind, they have used reasoning in a place where it cannot be used. And I'll come back to this subject, inshallah, in a little bit more detail later on. A third methodology is the one which is based upon mystical experience, like the Sufis, and also in other religions like those people in Eastern religions perhaps, who base it upon some sort of communion which they claim to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whoever they worship. Here they have overstepped the bounds concerning what they feel in their hearts, or concerning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed in them, concerning feelings and so forth. So the point is that while we say that both al-fitra, the natural disposition which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in mankind, can be used to understand certain matters of belief, and likewise reasoning can be used to understand certain matters of belief, however, though they are not able independently to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to believe and have faith in, but rather that must be rooted in revelation. How do we know this? Well, the Prophet ﷺ has told us. The Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, he said, every single newborn child is born upon al-fitra, or the natural state in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in, the natural state which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed it with. And then its parents, the newborn's parents, will make it a Jew, will make it a Christian, and will make it a Magian, or fire worshipper. So here the Prophet ﷺ has shown us that the fitrah can get corrupted. And that is why, if you speak to a Christian, he cannot understand his feelings and his inclinations is that the Trinity is correct, because his fitrah has been corrupted. And that is why one cannot rely upon personal experience or mystical experience, as the Sufis claim, alone in trying to determine matters of belief. And likewise, upon reasoning, one cannot rely upon that alone itself. Because even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed people with reason, reasoning only has a certain limit, and after which reason cannot exceed that limit. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the first verse, or the second verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. Which is an indication that these matters are unseen and therefore can only be known through revelation, and cannot be just known through speculation and inference and deduction by itself. So that's in brief the sources upon which Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah base their creed or their belief upon. They base it solely upon the Quran and the Sunnah, the Book of Allah and the Sunnah, or the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And likewise, they use al-ijma' as a proof, the consensus of the earliest scholars of the Muslims, and that is because the ijma', the correct ijma', is rooted in the Book and the Sunnah. And likewise, al-fitra, man's natural inclination, which Allah has endowed him with, and also sound reasoning, can be used to support these beliefs, however, though they cannot be used independently. Nor can they be used as the yardstick to measure whether a belief is correct or incorrect. I would like to now briefly mention some of these unique characteristics which you find only in the belief of the Sunni Muslims. And you will not find it in the creed of anybody else. Whether that creed is a religion which was initially revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Christianity and Judaism, which was then corrupted, or a religion invented by the people, like the pagans, whether they are Buddhists or Hindus or whatever, animists, or those sects which attribute themselves to Islam, however have deviated, irrespective of the degree in deviation, from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. What are some of these characteristics? Well, the first of the characteristic is that this creed, Sunni Muslim creed, the aqeed of Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, is of a divine, infallible origin. In the sense that since this is rooted in the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must understand that there is no error possible to it. It is impossible for it to have anything wrong in it, because it is only found and based in revelation. As far as those other groups who base it on revelation in part, whether that revelation has been corrupted, or use some yardstick to measure revelation, like the Sufis who use it by their mystical experience, or the philosophers and those who have been affected by their teachings, who use their reasoning to judge whether a revelation is correct or not, they have deviated from this principle. And that is why you will find in their beliefs error and falsehood. The second characteristic of this Sunni Muslim creed is that, as I mentioned before earlier, it agrees with man's fitrah, Allah, the natural disposition which Allah has endowed him with, and also with sound reasoning. Because it's divine in origin, because it is rooted in the revelation, right? It therefore agrees with the person's fitrah, his uncorrupted fitrah. The person finds that it fits with his natural inclination. And also sound reasoning, correct reasoning, also shows the truth of this. And as far as the first, the fitrah, this is the explanation, as some scholars have said, of the verse, Nurun ala nur, light upon light. Some scholars have explained, like Ibn al-Qayyim, it is said it is the light of the revelation which